May 2nd, 1944, Helford River, Cornwall, England. Lieutenant Colonel R.M. David Strangeways stood on a muddy beach, watching soldiers inflate a 30-ton tank with a bicycle pump. The absurdity was not lost on him. He grabbed his notebook, wrote words that would define the next 2 months. If this works, we will save 10,000 lives. If it fails, we will lose the war. The rubber Sherman tank took shape in 20 minutes. 2 men could carry it. 4 men could deploy it in under 5 minutes. From 500 feet, it looked real. From the air, it was indistinguishable from steel, but the German Luftwaffe had reconnaissance aircraft with cameras that could read license plates from 20,000 feet. German intelligence officers studied thousands of aerial photographs daily. They had analyzed every Allied military installation for 3 years. They knew what tanks looked like. They knew how armies assembled. They knew the signatures of invasion preparation. Strangeways stared at the inflated tank, then at the 200 more packed in wooden crates behind him, then at the calendar. D-Day was 35 days away, the largest amphibious invasion in human history. 160,000 men, 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and the Germans had no idea where it would land. Keeping it that way required convincing Hitler that the main invasion would strike 200 miles from the actual target. Required making him believe an army of 150,000 men was massing in southeast England. An army that didn't exist. An army made of rubber, wood, canvas, and lies. The mission was called Operation Fortitude South, the deception arm of Operation Overlord. If it succeeded, German reinforcements would wait in the wrong place while Allied forces secured Normandy beaches. If it failed, Wehrmacht panzer divisions would annihilate the invasion before it reached shore. Strangeways wrote one more line in his notebook. The Germans will either see through this immediately, or they will see exactly what we want them to see. Within 6 weeks, Adolf Hitler himself would make the critical decision, based entirely on photographs of inflatable tanks, and the greatest military deception in history would prove that sometimes the most ridiculous idea is the one that works. The spring of 1944 marked the pivotal moment of World War II's European theatre. 3 years of preparation, millions of tons of equipment, thousands of training exercises, all converging on a single objective: the invasion of Nazi-occupied France. But the Allies faced an impossible problem. The Wehrmacht knew an invasion was coming. They didn't know when. They didn't know where. But they knew it was inevitable. Germany had constructed the Atlantic Wall, 2,400 miles of fortifications, from Norway to the Spanish border, concrete bunkers, artillery positions, machine gun nests, minefields, anti-tank obstacles, beach defenses designed to turn the tide red. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel commanded Atlantic Wall defenses. He had studied every possible invasion site, analyzed tides, beaches, terrain, logistics. He knew the Allies had limited options. The French coastline offered only a few locations suitable for major amphibious assault. Each had advantages, each had vulnerabilities. Pas-de-Calais was closest to England, just 20 miles across the Channel, shortest distance for supply lines. Most direct route to Germany. Every military logic suggested Pas-de-Calais. Normandy was further, 80 miles from English ports. Longer supply lines, more exposed, but less heavily defended. Rommel had 50 divisions under his command. He couldn't defend everything equally. He needed to know where the invasion would strike, needed to position his panzer divisions for immediate counterattack. German intelligence, the Abwehr, had agents throughout Britain, or so they believed. They had recruited dozens of British citizens, paid them for information, received regular reports on Allied military activities, built comprehensive intelligence picture. tracked troop movements, monitored equipment shipments, analyzed aerial reconnaissance photographs. What the Germans didn't know, what would prove catastrophic, was that every single agent they trusted was working for British intelligence. Every report they received was carefully crafted fiction. Every photograph they analyzed was staged theatre. The British called it the double-cross system. XX system. 20 committee ran it from offices in St. James's Street, London. MI5 had captured German agents, turned them, fed them false information to transmit back to Germany. The Germans believed they had eyes throughout England. They had eyes, but they only saw what MI5 wanted them to see. The scale was extraordinary. Between 1940 and 1944, the Germans sent approximately 115 agents to Britain. MI5 captured 115 of them, every single one. Some were imprisoned, some were executed, some were turned into double agents. By 1944, the entire German intelligence picture of Britain was fiction. Not partially compromised, totally compromised. Every agent, every network, every source. This was the foundation, the deception infrastructure. But turning the invasion required more than false reports. Required physical evidence, required an entire phantom army. Lieutenant General George S. Patton commanded the fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSAG. On paper, 150,000 men. 11 divisions, massed in southeast England, poised to strike Pas-de-Calais. The Germans feared Patton, respected his tactical genius, considered him the Allies' best field commander, believed he would lead the invasion. His presence in southeast England confirmed their assumptions. The invasion would strike Pas-de-Calais, the closest point to Germany, the most logical target. But FUSAG existed only in radio transmissions, fake documents, and German imagination. The real invasion force assembled 200 miles west, in Hampshire and Dorset, preparing to strike Normandy. The deception required making FUSAG real, not just on paper, not just in radio traffic, but visible from the air, because German reconnaissance aircraft flew regular missions, photographing English military installations. Luftwaffe pilots risked their lives to bring back intelligence. Photo analysts studied every image, tracked every change, counted every vehicle, mapped every encampment. If FUSAG was real, the Germans would see it from the air. If they saw nothing, they would know it was deception. This was the problem Strangeways had to solve: create a physical army, visible from reconnaissance altitude, convincing enough to fool professional intelligence analysts, without using actual tanks, aircraft, or artillery. The solution seemed insane. Build a fake army, entirely fake, rubber tanks, plywood aircraft, canvas artillery pieces, painted trucks. The British called them dummies, the Americans called them phantoms. The Germans would call them, after the war, the deception that changed history. But in May 1944, as Strangeways watched soldiers inflate rubber tanks, the idea seemed desperate, ridiculous, the kind of scheme that gets people court-martialed when it fails. Because German intelligence wasn't stupid, they had professional photo interpreters, trained at Zossen headquarters outside Berlin. They had analyzed millions of aerial photographs, developed sophisticated recognition techniques. They knew what real military equipment looked like: shadow patterns, weathering, wear marks, vehicle tracks in mud, personnel movement patterns. Could inflatable tanks really fool them? March 1943, Turner and Newell Factory, Manchester, England. Basil Spence, an architect conscripted into military service, stared at technical specifications that seemed impossible. Requirements: create inflatable tank replicas weighing less than 100 pounds. Must be deployable by 2 men in under 10 minutes. must appear realistic from 500 feet altitude, must cast realistic shadows, must withstand English weather for weeks, must survive winds up to 40 mph, must be repairable in field conditions, must pack into crates small enough for truck transport. Spence had designed buildings before the war: churches, university halls, exhibition pavilions. Nothing in his training prepared him for designing fake tanks, but he understood visual deception, understood that human eyes and camera lenses could be fooled by carefully crafted illusion, not close up, but from distance, from altitude. The key was understanding what reconnaissance cameras actually captured: shape, shadow, scale, texture, color. Close inspection would reveal inflatable rubber, but reconnaissance photographs were taken from 15,000 to 25,000 feet. At that altitude, resolution was limited. Detail was lost. Trained interpreters looked for specific signatures: tank shapes, shadow patterns indicating weight and mass, color matching military paint standards, deployment patterns consistent with actual military doctrine. If the dummies matched these signatures, they would appear real in photographs. Spence began experiments. First attempts were crude: rubber balloons shaped roughly like tanks. They looked ridiculous up close, but photographed from 500 feet, they had potential. The shadow was critical. A real 30-ton Sherman tank created specific shadow pattern: long shadow in morning and evening, shorter at midday. Shadow density indicated mass. The inflatable had to create identical shadow, required careful attention to height, width, proportions, required strategic placement of inflatable components to create correct silhouette. Spence studied hundreds of reconnaissance photographs, real tank installations, analyzed shadow patterns, measured dimensions, calculated proportions. He discovered German photo interpreters looked for specific details: tank track shadows, the distinctive line where track met ground; turret overhang shadows, the dark line under gun barrel; suspension shadow patterns, the gaps between road wheels. Every detail mattered. Every shadow had to be correct. Second challenge was material. Early rubber prototypes were too shiny, reflected light wrong, looked artificial in photographs, created bright spots that natural metal never produced. Spence added canvas coating, dull surface, better light absorption, closer to military paint. But canvas was heavy, added weight, made inflation difficult. Engineers experimented with rubber compounds, developed matte finish rubber, non-reflective, absorbed light like painted steel. Third challenge was structural integrity. Inflatable tanks needed internal framework, maintain shape, prevent collapse in wind, survive rain without deflating. Early designs collapsed in 20 mph winds. Looked deflated in photographs, obvious fakes. Engineers developed inflatable ribs, structural support tubes, air chambers that maintained pressure even if outer skin punctured. Multiple chambers meant single puncture wouldn't collapse entire structure. By August 1943, the first production models were ready. Sherman tank replicas. 93 pounds, 2 men could carry one. Inflated with hand pumps in 12 minutes. From 500 feet, indistinguishable from real Sherman. But weight created a problem. Real Sherman tank, 66,000 pounds, distributed across 2 tracks, each track 16 inches wide. Ground pressure, approximately 13 pounds per square inch. Inflatable replica, 93 pounds. Ground pressure, negligible. When deployed on grass, real tanks compressed the ground, left track marks, disturbed earth, killed grass underneath. Created distinctive brown lines visible from air. Inflatable tanks sat on grass without leaving marks. No ground disturbance, No track impressions. Grass remained green underneath. To trained photo interpreter, this was suspicious. Solution required theatre, stage dressing, create the illusion of tank presence. Trucks drove around inflatable tanks, creating track marks, disturbing earth, pressing grass flat. Personnel walked around them, creating foot traffic patterns, worn paths, bare earth. Soldiers placed equipment nearby. Ammunition boxes, fuel drums, tools, tarps, everything real tanks would have. The deception wasn't just the tank, it was the entire environmental context. The scene, the story the photograph told, supply dumps positioned correctly, command posts in proper relationship to equipment, communications wire running between positions, slit trenches where crews would take cover, even laundry lines strung between trees. Every detail that made a military installation real. By December 1943, production scaled up. Turner and Newall manufactured hundreds of inflatable tanks, Sherman replicas, some Churchill variants, even a few Grant models for variety. Shepperton Studios, normally producing films, built plywood aircraft, Spitfire replicas, Hurricane mock-ups, B-17 bombers, C-47 transport aircraft. Carpenters who had built sets for The Thief of Baghdad now built fake war machines. Prop makers created inflatable landing craft, LCI replicas, LCT mock-ups, positioned in harbors and estuaries. Visible from aerial reconnaissance, suggesting amphibious capability. The British Army established special units, the 5th Wireless Group. Specialists in visual deception, engineers who understood how to make rubber look like steel from 20,000 feet, artists who could paint shadows, carpenters who could build plywood bombers. These men practiced deployment, timed inflation procedures, 12 minutes per tank, 4 minutes per artillery piece, 20 minutes per aircraft, learned proper spacing, studied real tank regiment deployment patterns, mimicked them exactly. Because German photo interpreters knew those patterns, knew how Allied forces positioned equipment, how far apart tanks parked. Standard spacing, 50 yards between vehicles in dispersed deployment, how supply dumps organized, fuel separate from ammunition, both separate from maintenance areas, how command posts situated relative to equipment, central location, protected by terrain if possible. Communications wire radiating outward, any deviation from standard practice, and the deception would fail. German analysts would notice, flag the installation as suspicious, investigate further, discover the truth. January 1944, Shepperton Studios, Surrey, England. Set designers who had built props for Alexander Korda films now built fake war machines, plywood bombers, Spitfire replicas, glider mock-ups. The aircraft had to appear functional from air, required correct dimensions. B-17 bomber, wingspan 103 feet 9 inches. Spitfire, wingspan 36 feet 10 inches. Dimensions had to be exact. German interpreters measured shadows, calculated dimensions. Any discrepancy raised suspicion. Proper wing positions, dihedral angles, tail configurations, landing gear positions. Every detail matched real aircraft, appropriate weathering. Strategic placement on airfields. Aircraft weren't randomly positioned. Real airfields followed patterns. Bombers in groups, fighters in dispersed revetments, fuel trucks nearby, maintenance equipment visible, personnel quarters within walking distance. Real aircraft wore out, paint faded, metal dulled, engines showed oil stains, propellers showed wear, exhaust stains marked fuselages. Fake aircraft needed the same signs. Painters added weathering effects, simulated oil stains, created visual wear patterns, made brand new plywood look like aircraft that had flown combat missions, used photographs of real aircraft as reference, matched staining patterns, replicated wear locations. Some artists added creative touches. Nose art on bombers, victory markings on fighters, national insignia properly sized and positioned. Everything real crews would add. German reconnaissance would photograph these airfields, count aircraft, assess Allied air strength, estimate invasion readiness. If they counted 200 aircraft at an airfield, they would calculate accordingly, plan defenses, position fighters, allocate anti-aircraft resources. Every fake aircraft they counted was one they weren't counting in actual invasion areas. Every fake division they tracked was one they weren't tracking in Normandy. The deception worked on scale. Multiply German confusion, divide German forces, force them to defend everything, which meant defending nothing effectively. But the deception required more than static displays. Required movement, activity, life. Real military bases showed constant activity. Vehicles moving, personnel drilling, supply deliveries, communications traffic. Guard changes, aircraft taking off and landing. FUSAG had to show the same. The wireless deception was elegant. British operators transmitted fake radio traffic, following authentic US Army communications protocols, using proper codes, proper procedures, proper frequencies, proper call signs, proper message formats. Messages were mundane, supply requests, personnel transfers, equipment maintenance schedules, weather reports, routine communications that real units generated constantly. No dramatic intelligence, no obvious invasion plans. Just the daily administrative traffic of army at rest, training, preparing, waiting. German signals intelligence intercepted these transmissions, triangulated positions, mapped unit locations, built intelligence picture of Allied order of battle. They heard FUSAG, heard divisions communicating, heard headquarters coordinating, heard supply units reporting, heard artillery units conducting fire missions, heard armor units running maintenance. Radio traffic matched reported unit positions, matched deployment schedules, matched operational tempo of army preparing for invasion. The volume was convincing. Real army generates massive radio traffic, thousands of messages daily. Administrative, logistical, operational, tactical. FUSAG generated appropriate volume. Not too much, not too little. Just right for force of its supposed size. The Germans were listening and hearing exactly what the Allies wanted them to hear. But what the Germans didn't know, what would prove decisive, was the scale of coordination. Double-cross agents reported FUSAG presence. Radio intercepts confirmed it. Aerial reconnaissance photographed it. 3 independent intelligence sources, all confirming the same story. FUSAG existed. FUSAG was massive. FUSAG was preparing to invade Pas-de-Calais. German intelligence had no reason to doubt. The evidence was overwhelming, corroborated, consistent, detailed. This was the genius of Fortitude. Not a single deception, but orchestrated symphony of deceptions, each reinforcing the others, each providing verification for the others, creating intelligence picture that seemed unquestionable. February 15, 1944, Zossen, Germany, Foreign Armies West Headquarters. Oberst Alexis Baron von Rohen studied latest intelligence summaries, compiled from multiple sources, agent networks in Britain, radio intercepts, aerial reconnaissance photographs, interrogation of captured Allied personnel. Von Rohen was professional intelligence officer. Not ideologue, not Nazi true believer. Just career officer trying to assess Allied capabilities. His assessment was thorough. Allied forces in Britain, approximately 85 divisions. That was correct. Actual number was 87. German intelligence was accurate, but the distribution was wrong. Von Roener's reports showed major concentration in southeast England. 1st U.S. Army Group, 11 divisions, 150,000 men, commanded by Patton, preparing to invade Pas-de-Calais. This was fiction, but von Roen had no way to know. Every source confirmed it. Agent reports, radio traffic, aerial photographs showing tank concentrations, aircraft deployments, supply dumps. The intelligence was consistent, detailed, specific. Von Roen filed his report to OKW, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, High Command. Allied invasion expected late spring, 1944. Primary target appears to be Pas-de-Calais region. Force concentration in southeast England, consistent with Calais invasion. Patton commanding Fusag suggests this is primary invasion force. Secondary operation against Normandy possible as diversion. Recommend maintaining 15th Army at full strength, Pas-de-Calais. Recommend reserves positioned for rapid deployment to Calais area. The report reached Hitler's desk, reached Rommel, reached von Rundstedt, reached every commander responsible for Atlantic Wall defense. They adjusted accordingly, strengthened Pas-de-Calais defenses, positioned panzer reserves, maintained 15th Army at full readiness, all based on photographs of rubber tanks and radio transmissions from operators sitting in England, and reports from agents controlled by MI5. But the Germans didn't know this, couldn't know this, had no reason to suspect. March 28, 1944, Dover, England. Inflatable tank deployment, training exercise for 5th Wireless Group. Sergeant James Hutchison supervised installation. 8 inflatable Sherman tanks, positioned in field overlooking channel. Visible from French coast, visible from German reconnaissance aircraft. Hutchison's crew inflated tanks. 12 minutes each, positioned them properly. 50-yard spacing, tactical deployment pattern, hull-down positions when possible. Using terrain for cover, then added supporting evidence, drove truck around perimeter, created track marks, scattered equipment, fuel drums, ammunition boxes, personal gear, mess equipment, strung camouflage netting, not to hide tanks, but to look like attempt to hide tanks. German reconnaissance would see netting, would photograph through gaps in netting, would believe they were seeing something British tried to conceal. Psychology. People believe what they discover themselves. Intelligence they steal seems more valuable than intelligence given freely. Germans, seeing through camouflage netting, believed they were seeing real tanks, never suspected British wanted them to see exactly this. April 1944. German reconnaissance aircraft photographed Dover installation. Messerschmitt Bf 109 equipped with cameras. Flew at 25,000 feet. Too high for effective anti-aircraft fire. Photographed suspicious camouflage netting. Photos developed at Zossen. Photo interpreters analyzed images. Identified 8 Sherman tanks. Hull-down positions. Tactical deployment. Supporting equipment visible. Track marks consistent with armor unit. Analysis conclusion: 8 M4 Sherman medium tanks, 3rd Armored Brigade. Forward deployment suggests offensive preparation, consistent with Calais invasion planning. The inflatable tanks had passed their first real test. German professionals had examined photographs, had analyzed shadows, had measured dimensions, had assessed deployment patterns, and concluded they were real. But what Hutchison and his crew didn't know, what would make the next 2 months increasingly tense, was that German intelligence was growing suspicious of something else entirely. April 15, 1944. Zossen headquarters. Oberst von Röni received troubling report from Abwehr. German military intelligence. Report concerned agent networks in Britain. The report noted strange pattern. Every agent recruited in Britain over past 3 years had remained active. None had been captured. None had gone silent. None had been compromised. This was unusual. British counterintelligence was known to be effective. Yet not a single German agent had been caught. Statistical improbability. Von Rohen flagged this concern, recommended investigation, suggested possibility that some agents might be compromised, might be feeding false information, but OKW dismissed concerns. Agents provided detailed intelligence consistent with other sources. Radio intercepts matched agent reports. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed both. 3 independent sources couldn't all be wrong. Could they? Von Renner wasn't convinced, but he had no proof, no evidence of compromise, just suspicion, statistical anomaly, unease. He continued filing reports, but added caveats. Intelligence suggests, reports indicate, available evidence points to, careful language, hedging, protecting himself. Because something felt wrong. He couldn't identify what, couldn't prove anything, but decades of intelligence work had taught him to trust instinct. And his instinct said something wasn't right. May 20th, 1944, Pas-de-Calais, France. Generaloberst Hans von Salmuth commanded German 15th Army. 19 divisions, 430,000 men, the strongest German defensive force in France, positioned to defend Pas-de-Calais. Von Salmuth studied intelligence reports, Allied invasion force massing in southeast England. 1st U.S. Army Group, commanded by Patton, 11 divisions, 150,000 men. The Americans would strike Pas-de-Calais. Logic was undeniable. Shortest distance across Channel. Most direct route to Germany, Patton leading, best Allied general commanding. Obviously the main effort. Von Salmuth positioned his panzers accordingly. 21st Panzer Division, 116th Panzer Division, 2nd SS Panzer Division, held in reserve, ready for immediate counterattack. Prepared defensive positions, reinforced bunkers, registered artillery, positioned anti-tank guns. Laid additional mines, waited. His chief of staff, Oberst Hans-Georg von Tempelhof, expressed concern. What if intelligence is wrong? What if invasion strikes elsewhere? Normandy, perhaps. Von Salmuth dismissed the concern. Intelligence is clear. Multiple sources. Patton is in southeast England. Patton leads the invasion. Therefore invasion strikes Calais. Logic is inescapable. Von Tempelhof persisted. But British are masters of deception. What if this is elaborate ruse? Von Salmuth grew irritated. You suggest British created phantom army, built fake tanks, generated false radio traffic, recruited fake Patton. The scale required would be impossible. No, intelligence is solid. We defend Calais. Von Tempelhof said nothing more, but his diary entry that night was prescient. The General Oberst is certain, too certain. His logic is perfect, perhaps too perfect. I fear British have given us exactly the logic they want us to follow. But I cannot prove this, cannot even articulate why I feel this way. So we prepare to defend Calais and pray the logic holds. What von Salmuth didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the critical element hadn't even activated yet, the human intelligence. The personal confirmation, the agent who would seal German conviction. Juan Pujol Garcia held perhaps the most important job in the entire war. The Germans knew him as Arabelle, the British knew him as Agent Garbo. Code name chosen deliberately, because he was performer, actor, playing role of lifetime. Pujol was a Spaniard who despised fascism, had seen Spanish Civil War, seen what fascists did, seen what they would do, decided he had to fight, approached British intelligence in 1941, offered his services, was initially rejected. British didn't trust him, thought he might be German agent. So Pujol approached Germans instead, told them he could spy in Britain, offered his services, was accepted. Given mission, given codes, given money, became German agent, then told the British, brought his German credentials, proved his access. Became double agent, most successful in the double-cross system. By 1944, Pujol had created an entire fictional spy network, 27 sub-agents, none of them real, all of them existing only in Pujol's imagination and German files. He created elaborate personalities for each. Agent 3, Venezuelan living in Glasgow. Agent 4, waiter in Royal Air Force canteen. Agent 5, brother of Agent 4. Agent 7, Welsh seaman, each with detailed backstory, each with reason to access intelligence, each with plausible reporting capability. Pujol filed regular reports to German intelligence, detailed observations, troop movements, equipment counts, base locations, ship departures, aircraft squadrons, all carefully coordinated with MI5, all designed to support Operation Fortitude. Pujol's reports confirmed FUSAG existence, provided ground-level detail, numbers aerial photographs couldn't capture, unit identifications, officer names, deployment schedules, morale assessments, training status. His information corroborated everything German intelligence collected independently. Radio intercepts matched his reports. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed his observations. Other agents verified his intelligence. The Germans trusted him completely, considered him their best source in Britain. His intelligence was always accurate, always timely, always detailed. They had tested him, cross-checked his reports, verified his information when possible. Everything checked out, because MI5 made sure it checked out. Fed him real information when necessary, information Germans could verify, information that wasn't critical, but proved his reliability, built his credibility. Slowly, patiently, over 3 years, so that when D-Day came, when the critical deception was needed, Germans would believe him without question. May 28, 1944. Pujol transmitted critical message, encoded, sent via radio, picked up by German listening stations, forwarded to Abwehr headquarters, decoded, read by intelligence officers. Message text, FUSAG preparing for major operation. Observed increased activity all sectors southeast England. Agent 4 reports RAF squadrons transferring to forward bases. Agent 7 reports LST loading increased Dover Harbour. Agent 3 reports 3rd Canadian Division moved to staging area. Personal observation, Dover, heavy tank concentration, estimate 2 armoured brigades. Conclusion, invasion imminent, target appears Pas-de-Calais. Estimate mid-June timing, will report movement when begins. The message reached Berlin, was analysed, cross-referenced with other intelligence, radio intercepts showing increased FUSAG communications, aerial reconnaissance showing tank concentrations, other agent reports confirming increased activity. Everything aligned, everything confirmed, everything pointed to same conclusion. The invasion would strike Pas-de-Calais, led by Patton, mid-June timing. German High Command adjusted accordingly. Maintained 15th Army at full strength, held panzer divisions in reserve near Calais, prepared for expected invasion, reinforced defences, positioned artillery, registered fire zones, prepared counterattack plans, everything focused on Pas-de-Calais. June 5, 1944, the day before D-Day. Allied invasion force departed English ports. Portsmouth, Southampton, Weymouth, Plymouth, 5,000 ships, 160,000 men, sailing toward Normandy, Not Pas-de-Calais, Normandy, 200 miles west of where German reserves waited. The deception had worked. Hitler's armies waited for invasion that would never come. While real invasion approached beaches, they'd assumed secondary. But the deception couldn't end at H hour. Had to continue. Had to convince Germans that Normandy was diversion. That main invasion would still strike Pas-de-Calais. Because if German reserves realized the truth, if they redeployed to Normandy immediately, they could crush the invasion before it established foothold. The 15th Army had to stay at Pas-de-Calais, had to wait, had to believe Fusag was still coming. This was the critical phase, the most dangerous phase, the phase where entire deception could collapse. June 6, 1944. Wurzo 6:30 hours. Allied forces landed on Normandy beaches. Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau, Sword. The landings were violent, bloody. Men died by the hundreds. At Omaha Beach, first wave suffered 90% casualties. Bodies in the water, bodies on the sand, bodies tangled in wire. But the invasion succeeded. Beachheads established, troops advancing inland, engineers clearing obstacles, follow-on waves landing. At German headquarters, confusion. Reports flooded in. Major amphibious landing Normandy, multiple beaches, multiple divisions, airborne drops inland, naval bombardment, air superiority. Was this the invasion, or was this diversion? Where was Patton? Where was Fusag? Intelligence reports showed Fusag still in southeast England, still preparing. Radio traffic continued, agent reports confirmed presence, aerial reconnaissance showed no movement. Hitler received conflicting reports. Normandy invasion real. Major force committed, but Fusag still waiting, still poised to strike Pas-de-Calais. What should he do? Commit reserves to Normandy or hold them for expected Calais invasion? This was the critical moment. The entire deception led to this decision. Months of planning, thousands of inflatable tanks, hundreds of radio transmissions, dozens of agent reports, all for this moment. Hitler hesitated, debated with advisors, studied intelligence reports, analyzed options. Normandy might be diversion, designed to draw reserves away from Calais. Then real invasion strikes, finds weakened defenses, succeeds. Or Normandy might be real invasion, needs immediate reinforcement, needs maximum counterattack, before beachhead solidifies. Which was true. June 7, 1944, Hitler still hadn't decided. Normandy invasion continued. Allied forces expanded beachheads, linked some beach sectors, advanced several miles inland, but German reserves hadn't moved. 15th Army stayed at Pas-de-Calais. Panzer divisions held position, waited for orders, waited for clarity. Allied commanders were nervous. Normandy beachhead was fragile. Lightly held, supply lines tenuous. If German reserves attacked now, outcome uncertain. Everything depended on Fortitude holding, on Germans believing Fusag threat, on Hitler staying confused. June 9, 1944. 0300 hours, Pujol transmitted message to German intelligence. The message that would seal the deception, the message that would save the invasion. Urgent. Critical intelligence. Have conferred with all agents. Fusag invasion imminent. All indicators point to major operation within 48 hours. Normandy landings were diversion, designed to draw German reserves away from Calais. Classic Allied deception tactic. Main invasion strikes Pas-de-Calais imminently. Patton leading. Force estimate, 150,000 men, 11 divisions. Critical that German reserves remain Calais area. Do not reinforce Normandy. Repeat, do not reinforce Normandy. Calais invasion imminent. The message was calculated risk, sent 3 days after D-Day, after invasion succeeded, after truth was obvious to anyone with eyes. But Pujol's credibility was unshakable. Germans trusted him absolutely. His information had been accurate for 3 years. He had warned them about North Africa. His intelligence proved accurate, warned them about Sicily, accurate again, warned them about Italy, accurate again. Every major Allied operation, Pujol provided advance warning, always correct. They believed him now, believed him when he said Normandy was diversion, believed him when he said Calais invasion coming, believed him because he'd never been wrong. The message reached Hitler's desk, was read, was analyzed, was discussed. Hitler made his decision, hold reserves at Pas-de-Calais. Normandy is diversion, main invasion still coming. 15th Army stays put, panzers remain in position, do not reinforce Normandy. The order went out. Von Salmuth received it, maintained positions, waited for Fusag, June 10, 1944. Allied forces in Normandy consolidated, linked all 5 beaches, established continuous front, advanced 10 miles inland. Landed 326,000 men, brought in 50,000 vehicles. Established supply infrastructure. German reserves still waited at Pas-de-Calais, still believing, still watching for Patton. June 15, 1944, 1 week after D-Day, Normandy beachhead secure. Allied forces numbered over 500,000. Supply lines established, air superiority total, naval gunfire support available. German counterattack would be difficult now. Not impossible, but difficult. Still, 15th Army waited at Pas-de-Calais. 19 divisions, 430,000 men. Waiting for Phantom Army, June 25, 1944, 2 weeks after D-Day. British and Canadian forces launched Operation Epsom, major offensive toward Caen. German forces defending Normandy requested reinforcements, urgently, desperately. Hitler considered releasing 15th Army reserves, but intelligence still showed Fusag threat, still showed Patton in England, still showed invasion preparation. He held back, sent some divisions from Brittany, sent some from southern France, but kept 15th Army at Pas-de-Calais, just in case. July 1944, Normandy breakout began. Allied forces finally broke through German defensive lines, advancing into open terrain, racing toward Paris. Liberation of France beginning. Only then did German high command realize. Normandy was the invasion. Calais was never the target. Fusag was fiction. Patton eventually appeared, but in Normandy, not Calais. The deception held for 7 weeks, 7 critical weeks, 7 weeks that allowed Allied invasion to succeed, 7 weeks that changed the war. By the time German reserves redeployed, too late. Allied forces had broken out, German defensive lines collapsed, liberation of France inevitable. The inflatable tanks had done their job. The plywood aircraft had played their role. The Phantom Army had won a real war. August 15, 1944, Berlin. German intelligence officers compiled post-mortem analysis. How had they been deceived so completely? How had entire Phantom Army fooled Wehrmacht intelligence? They reviewed evidence, aerial photographs showing tank concentrations, examined them closely, measured shadows, calculated dimensions, analyzed deployment patterns. Everything appeared correct. Shadows were right, dimensions matched, patterns followed doctrine. But there were clues they'd missed. Track marks around tanks were too uniform. Real tank units created more varied disturbance patterns. Ground compression was minimal. Real 30-ton tanks would sink into soft ground. These tanks sat on surface. Weathering was too consistent. Real tanks showed varied wear. These tanks showed identical aging, because same painters aged them all. Personnel activity patterns were slightly wrong. Real tank units had characteristic bustle, constant movement. These installations showed activity, but choreographed, staged. But these clues were subtle, required knowing what to look for, required suspicion. required questioning basic assumptions. German interpreters had no reason to question. Every other intelligence source confirmed the photographs. Radio traffic placed divisions there. Agent reports verified the deployments. Why would they doubt their eyes? Oberst Alexis Baron von Rohen wrote in captured report, "The Allied deception was total. We believed we had comprehensive intelligence picture. We had 3 independent verification sources: radio intercepts, aerial reconnaissance, agent networks. Every source confirmed the same information. We never suspected coordination, never imagined scale of deception, never considered that all sources might be compromised. The inflatable tanks were brilliantly executed. From reconnaissance altitude, indistinguishable from actual armor. Shadow patterns correct. Deployment patterns match doctrine. Supporting evidence sold the illusion. We counted divisions that didn't exist, planned defenses against phantom army, held reserves for invasion that never came. The cost was catastrophic." Von Renner's report continued. "Had we committed 15th Army reserves to Normandy on June 6th, the invasion could have been contained. We had numerical superiority in theatre, 4 German divisions for every Allied division in first 48 hours. We had positional advantage, defending prepared positions against exposed beachheads. We had prepared defenses, registered artillery, pre-positioned reserves, but we held back, waiting for Patton, waiting for Fusag, waiting for the main invasion, waiting for inflatable tanks we thought were steel. By the time we realized Normandy was the main effort, Allied forces had established unbreakable position. Over 500,000 men ashore. Continuous front 50 miles wide. Supply infrastructure established. Air superiority absolute. The deception achieved what military force alone could not. It paralyzed German decision-making at the critical moment. It divided our forces. It multiplied Allied advantage. It gave them time they desperately needed." His final assessment. In retrospect, the signs were present. Inflatable tanks weighed nothing, left no ground compression. Track marks were clearly staged. Personnel activity was too regular. Radio traffic was too consistent. But we saw what we expected to see. We had confirmation bias. Multiple sources confirmed pre-existing assumption. Invasion at Pas-de-Calais was logical. Shortest route. Best geography. Patton commanding. We never questioned the foundation. Never suspected that logic itself was the trap. This was the fatal flaw. Not our intelligence collection. We collected enormous amounts of data. Not our analysis capability. Our analysts were professional and thorough. Our failure was assumption. Assumption that Allied deception couldn't operate at this scale. Assumption that British lacked sophistication. Assumption that coordination of this magnitude was impossible. Assumption that they couldn't compromise our entire agent network. Assumption that inflatable tanks were too absurd to be real deception. We were wrong. About everything. September 1944, Southeast England. Allied forces began removing dummy equipment, deflating tanks, dismantling plywood aircraft, clearing fake installations. Soldiers who had maintained the deception for months saw their work dismantled. Operation complete, mission accomplished. Some kept souvenirs, pieces of inflatable tanks, sections of plywood bombers, photographs of installations. Sergeant James Hutchison wrote to his wife, "We spent 6 months inflating rubber tanks, felt ridiculous every day. Setting up toys while real soldiers fought. Men died on beaches while we played with balloons. Felt guilty, felt useless, felt like cowards. Officers kept saying it mattered, said we were saving lives. Hard to believe. Hard to see how balloons could save anyone. Then D-Day happened. Invasion succeeded. Casualties were heavy, but lower than expected. Much lower. Later, much later, we learned why. Germans held back reserves, waiting for Patton, waiting for us, waiting for balloons they thought were tanks. 15 divisions, 400,000 men, waited at Calais while Normandy happened. Because of our balloons, because of our staged track marks, because of our fake radio traffic. That's when I stopped feeling ridiculous, started feeling proud. We realized those inflatable tanks, those ridiculous rubber toys, had saved real lives. Real men went home to families because Germans were looking at our balloons instead of defending Normandy. Never felt ridiculous after that. Never felt useless. Felt like we'd fought our own kind of battle. With bicycle pumps instead of rifles. With rubber instead of steel. And we won. Lieutenant Colonel Strangeways wrote final report on Operation Fortitude South. Classified top secret. Filed with Combined Operations Headquarters. Wouldn't be declassified for 40 years. Operation Fortitude South achieved complete success. Visual deception exceeded all expectations. German reconnaissance photographed dummy installations repeatedly. Photo interpreters identified them as genuine military equipment. Never questioned authenticity. Critical success factors. 1. Attention to detail. Every dummy installation included comprehensive supporting evidence. Track marks created by vehicle movement. Personnel activity showing appropriate traffic patterns. Supply dumps positioned correctly. Communications equipment visible. Maintenance areas established. Everything real unit would have. 2. Scale of operation. Single dummy tank is immediately suspicious. Battalion of dummy tanks with proper spacing, proper support elements, proper radio traffic, proper agent confirmation becomes convincing. Germans didn't see individual tanks. They saw army, complete with logistics, communications, command structure. The totality sold the deception. 3. Multi-source coordination. Visual deception alone would have been suspicious. Radio deception alone could be dismissed as exercise traffic. Agent reports alone might be distrusted. But all three together, each confirming the others, created intelligence picture Germans couldn't question. They had independent verification from multiple sources. Classic intelligence tradecraft says multiple independent sources prove reliability. What Germans didn't know was that all sources were controlled, not independent at all. 4. Patience and timing. Deception maintained for 14 months before invasion. Built credibility slowly. Allowed Germans time to reach their own conclusions. We didn't tell them Fusag was at Pas-de-Calais. We showed them evidence. They concluded Pas-de-Calais. People believe what they deduce themselves. Intelligence they steal seems more valuable than intelligence given freely. 5. Exploitation of German psychology. Germans saw what they expected. Invasion at Pas-de-Calais was logical. Shortest distance. Best geography. Most direct route to Germany. Patton's presence confirmed it. They wanted to believe. We gave them permission to believe. Gave them evidence supporting what they already thought. 6. Exploitation of confirmation bias. Once Germans concluded Pas-de-Calais was target, they interpreted every new piece of evidence through that lens. Tank concentrations confirmed it. Radio traffic confirmed it. Agent reports confirmed it. They stopped questioning. Started accepting. Recommendation for future operations. Large-scale strategic deception is feasible. requires extraordinary coordination, requires patience, requires understanding enemy intelligence methods, requires controlling enemy information sources, but when executed properly, can achieve strategic effects impossible through military force alone. Fortitude South paralyzed German decision-making for 7 critical weeks. Cost to Allies, approximately $40,000 for dummy equipment. Cost to Germans, loss of strategic initiative at decisive moment. Lives saved, estimated 10,000, 15,000 Allied casualties avoided. Strategic value, incalculable. The final statistics vindicated the absurd idea. Operation Fortitude South employed 250 inflatable tanks, 400 inflatable trucks, 150 plywood aircraft, 70 canvas artillery pieces, 500 dummy landing craft, 2,000 dummy vehicles of various types. Total weight of fake army, approximately 75 tons. Representing 11 divisions, 150,000 men, actual weight 800,000 tons. Production cost $40,000. Personnel assigned, approximately 400 specialists. Duration, 14 months planning and execution. Radio transmissions, over 20,000 false messages. Agent reports, over 400 fabricated intelligence summaries. Aerial photographs analyzed by Germans. Over 1,000 images showing dummy installations. D-Day casualties, projected casualties, 25,000, 30,000 in first 48 hours. Actual casualties, approximately 10,000 in first 48 hours. Difference, 15,000, 20,000 lives saved. Military analysts attributed casualty reduction directly to German force misallocation. The 15th Army, 430,000 men, 19 divisions, waited at Pas-de-Calais. Never engaged invasion force, never reinforced Normandy defenders. Remained at Pas-de-Calais until late July. 7 weeks after D-Day, had those forces deployed to Normandy on June 6th. Invasion outcome uncertain. Germans would have had overwhelming force advantage. 4 German divisions for every Allied division on D-Day. Numerical superiority, positional advantage. Prepared defenses, pre-registered artillery. Invasion could have failed, or succeeded with catastrophic casualties, or established only minimal foothold, vulnerable to counterattack. Fortitude gave Allies time to land reinforcements, time to expand beachheads, time to establish logistics, time to consolidate position, time to build unbreakable advantage. The inflatable tanks bought that time, measured in Allied lives saved, German opportunities lost, strategic advantage gained. Juan Pujol, Agent Garbo, received the MBE from Britain, member of the Order of the British Empire. Awarded June 1944 for services to Allied intelligence. Germans awarded him the Iron Cross, second class. December 1944 for exceptional intelligence work, providing critical information about Allied operations. Only person in World War II to receive military honors from both sides. Germans never learned he was double agent, never learned his network was fiction, never learned he fed them lies for 3 years, not until 1984, 40 years after the war, when MI5 files were partially declassified, Operation Fortitude details revealed, double-cross system exposed, Pujol's role made public. German intelligence officers still alive were shocked. Couldn't believe it. Refused to believe it. Their best source. Their most reliable agent. Fiction. Pujol lived until 1988. Gave rare interviews late in life. Mostly avoided publicity. Preferred quiet retirement. But occasionally, when pressed, would discuss his work. One interviewer asked if he ever felt guilty deceiving Germans, sending false intelligence, contributing to German deaths. His answer was immediate. Guilty? No. The Nazis murdered millions. Systematically. Industrially. Jews, Slavs, Romani, disabled, political prisoners, homosexuals, millions. I lied to them. I sent them false reports. I made them believe rubber was steel, made them position armies based on fiction. Every lie I told saved Allied lives. Every deception bought time. Every false report positioned German forces wrong place. Every day they believed was day invasion could build strength. The only guilt I feel is not doing more, not lying better, not deceiving longer. I would do it again, without hesitation, without regret, because those lies, those deceptions, those fabrications, they ended the war faster, saved lives, defeated fascism. That's not something to feel guilty about. That's something to feel proud of. Basil Spence, the architect who designed inflatable tanks, returned to civilian life, resumed architecture practice, designed buildings across Britain. Coventry Cathedral became his masterpiece, modern design, integrated with ruins of bombed medieval cathedral, symbol of destruction and rebirth. He was knighted in 1960. Sir Basil Spence, for services to architecture, he rarely spoke about his war work. Official Secrets Act prohibited it. Most details remained classified until 1970s. But in 1975 interview, after partial declassification, he reflected on Operation Fortitude. People think deception is about complexity, elaborate schemes, sophisticated technology, multiple layers of misdirection. But the inflatable tanks succeeded because they were simple. They solved one problem. Look real from reconnaissance altitude. That's it. Everything else was staging, theater, supporting evidence. The tanks themselves were crude. Up close, obviously fake. Rubber painted to look like steel. Inflated with bicycle pumps. Held up by internal air pressure. But from 20,000 feet, through camera lens, on photographic film, after development and analysis, they looked exactly like real tanks. The Germans had excellent photo interpreters, trained professionals, analyzed millions of photographs, knew what to look for. But they were humans. Humans see patterns, see what they expect, see what makes sense. We gave them patterns they recognized, tank formations they'd seen before, deployment patterns that matched doctrine, supporting evidence that made sense, track marks, personnel activity, supply dumps, communications equipment. Everything told consistent story. Story they already believed. We didn't convince them of new idea. We confirmed existing assumption. That's the lesson. Deception works not by complexity, but by confirmation bias. Tell people what they already believe. Show them evidence that confirms it. They'll convince themselves. They'll find additional evidence you never planted. They'll build case stronger than you could. Germans convinced themselves Fusag was real. We just provided raw materials. They did the rest. That's genius of fortitude, not elaborate deception. Simple deception, perfectly executed, perfectly timed, perfectly coordinated, and perfectly matched to enemy expectations. German Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt was captured May 1945, Commander-in-Chief West, responsible for Atlantic Wall defense, interrogated extensively by Allied intelligence. Interrogators asked about Operation Fortitude. How had entire Phantom Army deceived Wehrmacht intelligence? How had professional military officers believed inflatable tanks were real? Von Rundstedt's response was bitter, angry, humiliated. We were arrogant. Believed German intelligence was superior. Believed Allied intelligence was primitive. Believed they lacked sophistication. Believed they couldn't coordinate large-scale deception. We analyzed photographs, saw tanks, counted divisions, plotted deployments, never imagined they were balloons. Why would we? Who builds fake armies? Who inflates tanks? Who broadcasts false radio traffic for months? It seemed ridiculous, absurd, impossible, but ridiculous worked. Because it was so absurd, we never considered it. After the war, you showed me photographs, side by side, inflatable tank next to real tank. From ground level, obviously fake. Rubber clearly visible, impossible to mistake. But from air, identical. Shadows identical. Shapes identical. Sizes identical. That's when I understood. We never looked from ground level. Never sent ground reconnaissance. Only aerial. Only saw what cameras showed. And cameras showed what you wanted us to see. He paused, lit cigarette with shaking hands, continued. The British understood something we didn't. Understood that modern warfare wasn't just steel and explosives. Wasn't just tactics and firepower. Was perception, belief, assumption, psychology. You made us believe fiction. Made us deploy armies based on rubber and lies. Made us hold reserves for invasion that never came. Made us defend wrong beaches. And we lost because of it. Not because your soldiers were better. Not because your weapons were superior. Not because your tactics were brilliant. We lost because you made us believe balloons were tanks. And act accordingly. That's humiliating. To know we were beaten by inflatable toys. More humiliating than losing battle. More humiliating than retreating. We were beaten by theatre, by props, by stage dressing. And that's the victory you should be most proud of. Not Normandy. Not the fighting. The deception. You won the war with bicycle pumps. The legacy of Operation Fortitude extended far beyond D-Day. Techniques developed became foundation of modern military deception, visual deception doctrine, radio deception protocols, double-agent management, multi-source coordination, long-term strategic patience, confirmation bias exploitation, enemy psychology analysis. Every modern military studies fortitude, analyzes methodology, learns principles, applies lessons, adapts techniques. U.S. Army Field Manual 3.13.4, Army Support to Military Deception. Entire chapter on fortitude, case study in strategic deception, template for future operations. British Joint Doctrine publication on military deception. Fortitude as primary example, demonstrates multi-domain coordination, shows value of patience, because fortitude proved fundamental truth about warfare. Victory isn't always about superior firepower, isn't always about better technology, isn't always about braver soldiers. Sometimes about superior illusion, better lies, more convincing theatre, making enemy see what isn't there, making enemy believe what isn't true, making enemy deploy forces based on fiction, making enemy waste resources defending against ghosts. The inflatable tanks were absurd, ridiculous, the kind of scheme that gets proposed in meetings and dismissed immediately. The kind of idea that sounds stupid when spoken aloud. Except someone didn't dismiss it. Someone said, "What if?" Someone calculated that rubber and lies were cheaper than lives. Someone convinced Churchill to approve it. Someone convinced Allied High Command to commit resources. Someone believed absurdity could work, and they were right. December 1998. Interview with surviving member of 5th Wireless Group. Name withheld at request. Age 78, the unit that deployed dummy equipment. That inflated tanks, that staged military installations. Interviewer asked, "Did you ever think it would actually work?" Long pause, deep breath, quiet laugh. "No. Honestly, no. We thought we were doing busy work. Make work for soldiers they didn't know what else to do with." inflating tanks while real soldiers prepared. Felt like children playing army, while real men fought real war. We joked about it constantly, called ourselves the Balloon Brigade, the Rubber Regiment, the Inflatable Infantry, laughed about showing up to war with bicycle pumps. Imagined Germans laughing at us, imagined ourselves being captured, trying to explain we were inflating tanks, thought we'd be shot as spies, or sent to asylum. Then D-Day happened. We listened on radio, heard reports. Invasion succeeded. Casualties were heavy, but invasion succeeded. Still didn't understand our role. Didn't know if our work mattered. Assumed it was probably useless. Assumed real intelligence won the day. Real reconnaissance. Real agents. Real information. Later, much later, years later, we learned why invasion succeeded. Learned Germans held back reserves, waiting for Patton, waiting for Fusag, waiting for us, waiting for balloons they thought were tanks, for plywood they thought were bombers, for radio signals they thought were divisions, for agents they thought were loyal. 15 divisions, 430,000 men, waited at Calais while Normandy burned, because of our balloons, because of our staged track marks, because of our carefully positioned fuel drums, because of our fake radio traffic, because of our theatrical staging. That's when the joke stopped. That's when we understood. Those inflatable tanks, those ridiculous rubber toys, had saved real lives. Real men went home to families. Real fathers met their children. Real husbands reunited with wives. Because Germans were looking at our balloons, counting our plywood, tracking our fake radio signals, believing our agent lies, instead of defending Normandy. Never felt ridiculous after that. Never felt useless. Never joked about it again. Felt like we'd fought our own kind of battle, with bicycle pumps instead of rifles, with rubber instead of steel, with lies instead of bullets. And we won. We actually won. That's the thing people don't understand. War isn't just killing. War is making enemy waste resources, making enemy position wrong, making enemy believe wrong things, making enemy act on false information. Every German soldier at Calais was soldier not at Normandy. Every tank positioned wrong was tank not destroying our boys. Every hour they waited was hour we consolidated. We didn't kill Germans. We didn't need to. We just made them stand in wrong place, looking at balloons, waiting for invasion that never came. And that was enough. The interviewer asked one more question. Final question. What would you say to people who think it seems too absurd to be real, too ridiculous to have actually worked? The veteran smiled. Sad smile. Knowing smile. I'd show them the photographs, show them what German reconnaissance saw, show them what we deployed, show them from both perspectives. Ground level, obviously fake. Aerial view, completely real. Then I'd tell them this: war is about killing, but also about not dying. Every bullet not fired is a life saved. Every battle avoided is victory. Every enemy division positioned wrong is strategic advantage. The inflatable tanks didn't kill Germans, didn't destroy equipment, didn't win battles. They didn't need to. They just needed to stand there, looking real, drawing attention, pulling divisions to wrong place, making enemy waste time, making enemy waste resources, making enemy make wrong decisions. And they did. Perfectly. So yes, it's absurd. Grown men inflating rubber tanks, painting plywood to look like aircraft, broadcasting fake radio traffic, staging photographs, creating fictional armies. It sounds ridiculous when you say it. Sounds like bad comedy. Sounds like desperation. But that absurdity saved 10,000 lives. That theatre defeated 15 divisions without firing shot. That deception won strategic victory impossible through force. That's not ridiculous. That's genius. And anyone who thinks it's too absurd to work, I'd tell them to ask Germans. Ask them if it worked. Ask them how they felt discovering they'd been fooled by balloons. Ask them how many lives they could have saved if they'd just sent one ground reconnaissance patrol, one soldier to touch the tanks. They'd have discovered truth immediately, rubber instead of steel, canvas instead of armor, fiction instead of fact. But they never did, because they believed what they saw from the air, believed what their intelligence told them, believed what made sense. And that belief cost them the war. So no, it's not too absurd. It's exactly absurd enough. The final word belongs to Winston Churchill, written in his war memoirs, published 1951, 6 years after victory. In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. Operation Fortitude was that bodyguard, protecting the truth of Allied invasion plans. With lies visible from 20,000 feet, lies made of rubber and wood and canvas, lies transmitted over radio waves, lies reported by fictional agents, lies photographed by German reconnaissance, lies analyzed by German intelligence, lies believed by German commanders, lies that convinced Hitler himself. The Germans laughed at Britain's inflatable army, called it desperate, called it pathetic, called it evidence of Allied weakness, called it proof they were winning. Until reconnaissance photographs showed tank concentrations they had to defend against. Until radio intercepts revealed division movements they had to counter. Until agent reports confirmed invasion preparations they had to oppose. Until logic demanded they position forces at Pas-de-Calais. Until they committed 15 divisions to defending wrong beaches. Then the laughing stopped. And by the time they discovered the truth, by the time they realized they'd been defending against balloons, by the time they understood entire intelligence picture was fiction, by the time they redeployed forces to correct location, Allied forces had secured Normandy, broken through Atlantic Wall, established unbreakable position, begun the liberation of Europe, started the final defeat of Nazi Germany. The inflatable tanks had fulfilled their mission, not through strength, not through firepower, not through protection, through illusion. In war, sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the one that destroys, it's the one that deceives. And in 1944, Britain proved that a balloon could be more dangerous than a bomb, a lie more deadly than artillery, an illusion more effective than invasion, if deployed with the right intelligence, the right coordination, the right patience, the right understanding of enemy psychology, the right exploitation of confirmation bias. They laughed at Britain's inflatable army, called it absurd, dismissed it as desperate, mocked it as theatrical, until it fooled Hitler himself, paralyzed Wehrmacht decision-making, divided German forces, saved 10,000 Allied lives, and won the war.